Good afternoon. How are you today? My cat Haddonfield joining us. So, welcome to this live broadcast that I rarely do. Mostly shorts here. So, if you're not already subscribing, subscribe. Isn't that what we're supposed to say? My name is Lonnie Schwartz, but most people just call me Schwartz. So, whatever you'd like to call me, as long as it's somewhat polite, I guess you could say that that's contemporaneous. We're fixated on our pronouns. And quite honestly, what inspired me to go live today is just that we're 7 months past October 7th, and we still have the likes of queers against Israeli apartheid and people waving the rainbow flag in support of Hamas, all the while seeing that, shall we say, the religion of peace has a problem with people of the same sex being attracted to one another. Something that we've gotten over a long time ago in what we would like to call, I would say, civilized society. And we are 7 months past what happened. And in a civilized society, we do not recognize rape as resistance. There's absolutely no moral justification for that action whatsoever in our Western democracies, or at least we thought so up until recently. And that's why, for a lot of Jews, myself included, I think there's this ever present sense of how is this happening? And it's a valid question because we're supposed to learn from history. History is riddled with facts that we just do not like. Right? For instance, here in Canada, there are a lot of treaties that we reneged on, us horrible, terrible white colonialists, on our First Nations. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, based on this evidence, we have played as best catch up as we can. We've made land compromises as best as we can to acknowledge the treaties that were reneged on more than 100 years ago at this point. Obviously, Canada only celebrating over its 150th, 200, a couple hundred years now. Let's be generous, a couple hundred years. And we're doing our best based on evidence that suggests, of course, that First Nations are in fact first. And when it comes to Israel, and when people talk about it as a double standard and anti-Semitism, Israel, by every stretch of evidence, as I've pointed out before, that's the ethnic and religious homeland of the Jewish people. If I was not Jewish and somebody presented in court the evidence to state historically, because everybody likes to mouth off about Israel's existence, historically, by the evidence, it suggests that Israel, well over 3,000 years ago, was populated by Jews. We see that by every artifact that is dug up from the land, and the same as we would do here in Canada. And how fitting that I take to Instagram. Geez, I'm just so comfortable doing Instagram, but here I am on YouTube. My apologies. Wrong platform. Anyhow, I digress. I'm a little lost because, well, I haven't done this in a long time. Where was I going? And where am I going with this? Of course, Israel. Marking its 76th anniversary as the modern state. That's where I'm going. Because back in 1948, that's when we officially were declared the nation state as it exists today. Of course, it's grown significantly. Tel Aviv was not the technological marvel it is now. Jerusalem, of course, still has its character, and it has to, by Israeli law, in fact. a lot of Jerusalem stone. If you've ever been to Israel, you'd see that and go, wait, Tel Aviv looks like this, but Jerusalem looks like that. It's because there's some heritage to preserve. Heritage that actually wasn't accessible for Israel and by Israel, unless, of course, they were allowed by Jordan to pass through a security wall to enter Jerusalem. And that was back in 1967. Yes, back in 1948, our holiest city wasn't even ours. And it's because of the many offensive wars by our neighbors that we had to defend ourselves from ever since 1948 that we even got more land. Northern Israel, the Carmel Mountains, bordering on Syria, if I'm not mistaken, in the timeline of war, Israel claimed that through the Six Day. So the land that has grown for Israel over time has been through wars with its neighbors that at no point did Israel say, yes, please attack us. We would very much like for you to engage in a war where we have some old Soviet and British tanks kicking around. And, well, we actually really don't have a lot. And people knew that and still tried to eliminate the state of Israel in its infancy. And here we are today, where Hamas has declared that's its expressed intent and has been since they took office shortly after 2005, when Israel forcibly removed Israelis and Jews from Gaza, where we had only been since 1967 after we won against Egypt. That's a fact, by the way. You might not like that fact. You may not have a lot of footage to look back on from any campus protest because nobody cared that it was Egypt that was, as people like to use the term, occupying ancient Gaza, which, by the way, isn't very ancient at all. Syria Philistina is the actual real record of when the term Palestine was used to officially describe the land. And that, of course, was to actually ethnically cleanse anyone living there. And of course, the majority of people living in that land were Jews. Palestine is not an ancient land. It does not exist in any real formal way whatsoever. Even the British mandate, it's just that, a mandate. And where it says Palestine on any coinage, everything else is symbolic of, if you guess Judaism and Hebrew, you'd be correct. It's not Arabic or Aramaic even. There's Hebrew and Jewish symbolism all over the artifacts that people quickly point to. So, no, again, your argument not valid. Right? Of course, you can engage in discussions. People can hear. You subscribe, you tune in live, you can comment. But, of course, in the old days, as us Zennials put it, you had to provide real evidence to prove your point. It wasn't that you weren't allowed to speak your mind, but in order to have meaningful discussion, you'd have to actually validate what you said with meaningful words and, of course, meaningful evidence. So to suggest that Palestine ever really existed is beyond the scope of history. I'm sorry. I can't acknowledge a land claim that anyone has when the land didn't exist in namesake to begin with, really. And that's in any way, shape, or form in any other country's definitive history, shall we say. There's been no governance, nothing to suggest of any lineage whatsoever. Namesake, a Roman slur, left over from the Greeks. The modern term Palestinian, it's really 1964. Lebanon, Jordan, and some Arab rejects. That's really the modern lineage, which again, in the 1960s, if my math is correct, is later than even modern state of Israel. So the name Palestinian, this fictional land that really shouldn't be acknowledged or given any real validity to whatsoever, as I've said for many, many years already. And of course, it's just recently been echoed by son of Hamas, Mossab Youssef. So I feel a little validated by that because, again, what would he know if I'm to default to an expert and learn about Hamas and the history of Hamas and their ideologies and their views on Israel and Jews? As a journalist, I would naturally look for an expert, and he would seem fitting. A white woman with blonde hair, not so much. And of course, the courage it takes to defect from Hamas and speak so openly. Mossab isn't shy about saying, you understand, I am doing this, but there's still a real threat to my life by doing it. Salman Rushdie, he doesn't make a whole lot of public appearances, and all he did was write a book. And I mean, if we see a theme here, of course, it's because I've talked about that before too. Islam is a religion. It is a religion that has roots in Saudi Arabia, the ethnic homeland of the Arabic people. Right? When someone would say to Jews, go home, we're like, well, Israel, we were kind of kicked out several times. Where can the Arabs go? Well, I mean, nobody's denying Saudi Arabia is their ethnic homeland, and nobody's denying that its religious origins of Islam lie in those very same borders at Mecca and Medina. I'm not denying any facts there either, and there's no Jew denying those facts. And in fact, there's no Jew even saying to Arabs, go back to where you came from. In the conversation that we have these days, it's more like, well, look, if you promise not to blow up cafes and discotheques and you kind of want to go to university or have some meaningful employment and become an actual Israeli citizen, maybe even serve in government, I don't know, head up a hospital, maybe a university, come on in. It would be just like any Canadian wanting to go into, say, America and work. I'd have to prove my value as a legal immigrant. But that's another discussion altogether. But you see where I'm going here? I hope you do. If you don't, and you want to comment, again, you're welcome to. I don't get a lot of comments on these that are argumentative to the point, and that's what I try to stay on, the point, whether I like them or not. A point a lot of people like to try and make is about the Netanyahu government. There's a very good chance he's going to be voted out in the next election. Rest assured, the Israeli citizens recognize that October 7th happened under his watch. And whether you like to acknowledge this or not, Israel's number one concern is not the economy. Voters in Israel, their number one concern is security. So no matter who's in charge, it's always about the security of Israel. So whether you like that fact or not is irrelevant in America or Canada, where the last time we fought, everyone famously recognizes 1812, and us Canadians under British colonial rule still won. Go Canada. But ever since then, we've had this pretty long and unprotected border. Security is the least concern, at least on this side of North America, when it comes to the United States and the Great White North. Israel, on the other hand, every neighbor has openly declared to destroy it ever since 1948. Canada's like, hey, can we get Target and screw it up? Sure, go ahead. That's literally, I think, the worst thing that's happened between Canada and the United States in recent memory is the absolute failure of Target coming to Canada. That's how bad it's been. Oh no. and Target coming from Minnesota, which is basically an extension of Canada south of the 49th. So, oh well. What's the worst that happens between Israel and its neighbors? Oh, yes, they openly declare that they want to kill all Israelis and Jews. That is why security is the number one concern for every Israeli citizen. Not the economy, not about saving the whales. No. Security. Buying a new condo in Israel? What do you think one of the questions is? Bomb shelter standard? Yes. Not tunnels, bomb shelters, by the way. Just to be clear about that. That's what Israel does with the money that they have to develop projects, building infrastructure for people to actually live in. That's, of course, private enterprise, not foreign aid funneled into the billionaires that are Hamas, in fact. A lot of people accurately pointing out right now that these aren't poor people who are fighting some sort of rebellion. These are billionaires hiding in Qatar at luxury hotels. Yasser Arafat died and handed over a $3 billion fortune to his wife, who I do believe lives in France now and openly says, "You realize we're billionaires because of the money you gave us." These aren't hard Google searches, right? I kind of alluded to it earlier. When in school back in the day, you had to provide actual sources. You'd go to the library, pick out your index card based on what you looked for in subject matter and where you'd find that book. And okay, is it legit? Can I check it out? No. Do I have to make photocopies? Is it an encyclopedia? The whole process. And if we're going to be arbitrary about all of these things, as we should, through the lens of history and morality and law and what we have now in 2024, absolutely. We have lots of precedent and history to draw from. And why we ignore that is what really gets to people like me and Jews like me. Maybe you. I don't know. Unless, of course, you choose to, like I said, comment. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that other stuff that the YouTube script is supposed to go by. Share as well, if you like. But there's just so many different issues that have to get unpacked consistently because part of the description in this video, of course, is never again. And I've been pretty quiet. Like I came out guns blazing, no pun intended. I understand where people might say, there he goes, but oh well, we're live, deal with it. And I've gotten quiet. It's really hard to drown out the voices that are out there because if, let's just say wholeheartedly, every single Jew was on the same page, that's only 15 to 16 million voices. There are the exceptions. I've talked about the likes of Gabor Mate and more famously Norm Finkelstein, the two greatest useful idiots on the face of the earth right now. Sons of Holocaust survivors who go on and on about saying that Israel's committing genocide and we haven't learned the lessons from the Holocaust. Absolutely, we have. I mean, even according to UN numbers today now. Oh, we believed Hamas wholeheartedly, but those numbers might actually be exaggerated. Yes, the numbers are now getting cut dramatically. The children that were supposedly slaughtered indiscriminately actually turned out to be teenagers bordering on their 20s that were, would you have guessed it? Oh, yes, recognized terrorists in a war that Israel is trying to fight against people who don't wear fatigues, by the way. That's a real easy one for people to maybe understand. Israel's walking in their olive green fatigues, fighting people in keffiyehs, Crocs, and t-shirts. blending in with civilians intentionally. And as we tend to remind you consistently and constantly, that's a war crime. Hamas has committed numerous war crimes. You're quick to say Israel has. Well, according to the numbers, Israel is on record at this point to be committing the least amount of collateral damage in the history of any known war or conflict. By every measure. And again, this is evidence. Like, if I'm, again, not Jewish, if I am just an atheist bystander watching the facts spread through with an ounce of critical thinking, then it's easy to see where the scales of morality and history lie and where they're balanced. Who has a rightful claim, even currently? Well, there's always been a Jewish presence in Israel, always. Again, I said this earlier in the video. I've said it in other videos I've shot before, where nobody in Canada denies who the First Nations are. By every measure and all evidence, by every means that we live now, we are trying to do land acknowledgements, which I think have gone a little overboard. But in terms of recognizing treaties, we're doing a lot of the right things here, as best as we can in the times that we have. I've reminded people before, where I live, I'm not very far from Mohawk territory, which borders on Belleville, which is one of Canada's largest cities, believe it or not. And because it's so populated, it's kind of hard to say you can have all of the Bay of Quinte and all of the St. Lawrence. And you know what? The Mohawks can have basically all of the land from basically Toronto to Montreal, all on Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence. It's not going to happen. Now, if there was a rightful claim that Arab Gazans had to the land, I'd listen a little more attentively, but nowhere in my understanding of time and history do they have one at all. There's no historical claim. There's no modern claim. There's no evidence to support a claim. None. So what's there to listen to? Fabrication. That's it. And we are putting up with lies. We're validating lies. People are still calling them Palestinians. I had people angry at me for asserting that that's my opinion. It's not my opinion. That's history's. And it's not even an opinion. That's what it is. Whether you like it or not doesn't matter. It is completely and utterly irrelevant. Speaking of liking, by the way, I find it very interesting. Again, I alluded to this very early in the video, that people who often wave the rainbow flag are the ones who are so very loud, taking to social media and declaring their solidarity with people who are literally laughing at them in Arabic. I shared a video earlier on my Instagram. I have the shorts where Memory TV, and it's a great resource. You want a great resource to really understand what's happening on the other side of the world in a language you don't understand, but if you can functionally read English, there are subtitles provided, and Memory shows what's being said in Arabic. And it's pretty clear. So again, it fails to register for people like myself to see how it's so easy for people to ignore what is so accessible and so easy. And I've often said this in private, if I presented any of this in context in a history class back in the day, a teacher would have said, I'm failing you. You understand that, right? None of what you said and wrote has any factual basis whatsoever. And what I was alluding to earlier in that same scope is, yes, the pronoun police and people who have this hyper awareness to microaggressions, yet can't understand how Jews might be feeling threatened on campus these days by the very venom they're spewing from their mouths. Of course, grammatically, that's correct, because I am speaking about a group of people, literally. But singularly, if you misgender, say the wrong pronoun or dead name, these people cry violence, but at the same token are siding with Hamas. Clearly, they can't read the subtitles on memory, because they're very clearly stating their intent and feelings towards same-sex couples and transgender and anybody who waves that flag now. It's really incredible. But here we are as Jews around the world watching this unfold in real time in 2024. I bring that up often because with the internet being what it is, cell phone technology what it is, 5G speeds. There's new 6G speeds, which I guess is faster than real time. I don't know anymore with this because I'm a bit of a Luddite, but not enough of one to understand that information itself, there's a responsibility to it, which is where journalism falls short, of course. But the printing press, while it was able to relay information a lot quicker than history had allowed prior to that, and more accurately, it's safe to say we've come a long way, baby. So the excuses to deny what is evidence is just unacceptable. That's why the conversation that's been had for the last 7 months is so infuriating. It shouldn't have to be a discussion. Again, we're on the eve of the 76th anniversary of the modern state of Israel. But by no measure do we just look at it at 76 years. Thousands of years of history. From Moses to Sandy Koufax. Yes, Israel has existed with the presence of Jews historically and consistently for thousands of years. And I'll repeat this, there's no Jew denying the ethnic homeland of the Arabic people. Arabs exist and have every right to exist. Their reach as an ethnicity is based on the Arab conquests. You can look that up. It wasn't just Napoleon and a bunch of white people doing it, okay? Alexander the Great, all these people. Then again, of course, Genghis Khan was a Mongol and conquered more land than anyone in recorded history. But I digress. And it's not just the Arab conquest that sprung from Saudi Arabia that led to the spread of Arabs throughout the Middle East and even stretching into Northern Africa, but the religion itself of Islam, again, its birthplace. Nobody's denying where it comes from, but its spread, much like other religions, came at the hands of violence throughout territories that you can see through documented wars and conquests in history. You just see its pattern. And then you go, oh, so that's why there's a dense Muslim population in Northern Africa that's slaughtering Christians right now. You don't have to like it. I know I don't. And clearly, I've just drawn another point in history that isn't even about Jews. What evidence is there to support that this religion has done anything in its spread to repair or even better the world as it is? And get this, I'm only, shall we say, about a week old from it clicking in my head and why Persians say, no, I'm Persian. Okay? I am not an Arab. I am Persian. Because prior to the 1970s, Iran was not a Muslim ruled country. The Persians learned their lesson, I guess, after almost getting completely eradicated by the aforementioned Genghis Khan. And it's the Persians, to my understanding, that are the ones going to jail or being beaten to death in the street for refusing to wear the hijab or burqa or any covering whatsoever. All starting to make sense on who the revolutionaries really are in a country like Iran. It's all part of the same conversation because it's all birthed from the same ideology. And if we want to talk about somewhere that I am grossly horrible with or at, it's math. That segue was kind of weak, wasn't it? Yeah. I don't have a producer. Who am I talking to? Forgive me, please. Math, not my strongest suit. But again, the religion of peace and tolerance that keeps saying it's a minority has 1.8 billion people practicing it in the world, placing it number 2 behind Jesus. You're not a religious minority in the world. So please stop. That number is pretty significant. And as I've illustrated in other short videos, what's 1% of 1.8 billion again? Isn't that like 18 million? That number alone is more than the entire world's Jewish population. So of the rotten apples of a 1% at the absolute lowest that you want to lay down for the Muslim population in the world to be rotten and want to kill all the Jews, that's more than 1 to 1, friendo. But we all know that that number is definitely not lying at 1%. And that's evidenced again by the last 7 months. If you're 1.8 billion people saying in unison that these rotten apples don't represent us, those 1.8 billion people, sorry, let's round, no, 1.72 billion outnumber the 18 million rotten apples. So where are they? Where are a lot of our Christian friends? I brought them up, the ones that openly defend the evangelicals. They see Israel as the site of the rapture, so it must be protected at all costs. I'm not saying that as a jab. That's just what the common belief is. Hey, we got to protect that rapture spot. Hey, if we want to meet up with Jesus in the afterlife, where's it happening? Israel. Oh, we better not let Israel get destroyed or taken over by anything, right? Because they acknowledge that, oh, yes, Jesus was born in Israel and was Jewish. Again, history you don't have to like, but history nonetheless. By the way, of course, according to YouTube script, isn't it you have to say like and subscribe and share at certain points throughout the video? Comment as well. I see there are people watching. And because I do get accused in my private life of just shouting at the clouds, or that I don't have all the answers and you're just a know-it-all and anything else of that ilk, well, I mean, if you want to chime in and correct me on something, I welcome it. Or if you want to point me in a direction I might not have gone down before, I do welcome that. Comments are available to you. I haven't restricted that. Interesting footnote, by the way, and I throw a nod out to trigonometry for welcoming the likes of Basim Youssef and Norm Finkelstein. They share opinions that Israel is a genocidal entity, even though it's the worst genocide of all time, because it isn't one. They're entitled to those opinions. They can stick around on YouTube or whatever social media platform they're on. I'm conflicted now about even bringing them on, though. Like, why bring them on as guests? Why raise their profile? It could be a one-sided conversation to debunk them because, quite frankly, it's very easy to debunk them. You don't need them in the same room for your blood pressure to spike. I don't believe in restricting speech to the point of which you don't let people talk until, of course, it's again the barometer of undue harm, which we are seeing on campuses now. And that's where again we seen the boilerplate issue from when Harvard, MIT, and UPenn were at a congressional hearing to months later now, where we see encampments that are physically denying Jews access to campus. The irony in that. Until it becomes actionable, actual genocide? No, not actual genocide, but violence? Absolutely. Intimidation? Absolutely. It's no longer just hate speech. And there's actual threats of violence in, what is it, mock courts they're holding now in these encampments. And of course, what do you think the punishment is to the Zionist that they talk about? Wouldn't you know it? It echoes what the punishment is based on what is referred to often as Sharia law. Let's just say it's a little worse than what Singapore does to you for spitting out gum. And most people lost their shit about that. To see where the moral grounds for a lot of people have been drawn is what's troubling. It's what's troubling daily to Jews around the world. I've mentioned it again in a short about living in Canada right now. And I know I live in a small town, but anytime I drive into Belleville on a weekend, I see that Nazi flag. I'm just going to refer to it as that because really it's a flag for a country that doesn't exist. And all it does is represent Hamas in a more palatable way. I've mentioned that before too. Hamas's actual flag is a little more belligerent about what their intents are. Their Jordanian ripoff is a little more palatable to wave in the streets. And yes, that's exactly what it is. It's a ripoff of the Jordanian flag. In the past, I erroneously said that it ripped off Iran's. I'm sorry, Iran, if I offended you by conflating the two. But the fact that we are here, the fact that I have to speak up, because that is a lesson from never again, is to speak up. Do not remain silent in the face of anti-Semitism. It's not welcoming. I don't want to do this. Some people think I really like this. It's draining. It's emotionally draining. It's hard because what we used to accept as fact is deteriorating based on people's slippery slope of language and what they interpret as truth. And from what's a microaggression to them because of a pronoun is somehow not an issue when you utter death threats to Jews and say that you want to wipe out the entire homeland of our people. That's where we are. That's what we see. That's what we see in real time. We see that we don't have real allies, I'm sorry to say. If we had real political allies, this wouldn't be going on for months now, would it? Of course, recently we were betrayed by who openly says, oh, it's unquestionable and unbreakable, our bond with Israel. But you know what? We're going to withhold certain arms from them now that they want to buy to defend themselves. It's because they're going into Rafah. I haven't even really talked about that, and I have alluded to it earlier. There's a border crossing with Egypt at Rafah. Egypt is still not letting people through by the thousands. Many do point out that that's politically motivated in order to make the Palestinians, as everyone likes to call them, martyrs. But these Arab Gazans welcome martyrdom. That's part of Islam. And if the holy rite to martyrdom is by killing Jews, they really don't have a lot of problems with that. Again, if you tune into outlets like Memory, they say it pretty clearly and calmly. In fact, it's like the fast lane ticket to a ride at Wonderland if you do it. It's like, who did you kill to get here? Oh, just a plain old infidel? Not a Jew? Pfft, wait in line. No, he killed Jews. He goes faster, gets to the front of the line. I mean, again, you don't have to like that, but that's the truth of the matter. With Hitler, it was Jews and everyone else. These are facts I don't particularly like. I would not be spared by Hitler because I choose to eat bacon and bread during Passover. I'm still Juden. That's something, again, that I've mentioned before. Norm Finkelstein, Gabor Mate, those two, they don't acknowledge that part. They don't acknowledge that the last Jews holding the doors open for the cattle cars were the actual last Jews thrown into the cattle cars. Okay, you did your job. You made sure the rest of your ghetto Jews are in here. Let's get you in now. And they sat there in disbelief going, wait, I just turned in. Oh, what? You believe the Nazi that said you wanted to kill all Jews? Well, it's easy to see now because you believe Hamas, who openly declares that they want to kill all the Jews, as do their friends in Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen and several other Islamic fundamentalist groups. I've joked before, by the way, that Hamas's platform was the most extreme and most appealing. Therefore, Islamic Jihad and the Muslim Brotherhood lost out. Memory serves and history serves, by the way, Hamas grew from the Muslim Brotherhood because the Muslim Brotherhood didn't hate Jews enough and didn't want to take enough immediate action to kill Jews. So, again, it's pretty clear what they want to do. And when Jews bring that up, the term everybody likes to bring up, of course, is Islamophobia, even when it's not in context. Now, of course, when we talk about the targeting of Jews, we must think about the Islamophobia. No, again, another word that I haven't even really brought up yet. I'm not going to really use that and haven't really used that because it's just a bullshit word. It's a shield to say you're not allowed to criticize us for committing heinous acts of violence because somebody drew a cartoon or might have looked at somebody's ankle the wrong way because the burqa and the covering wasn't going and hanging long enough. So, or your hanging wasn't even long enough. So I'm going to kill you because modesty. Like, time and again, evidence again, you're stereotyping. Not really. Because if it was such a vocal minority within the second most practiced religion in the world, we aren't having these discussions. Hamas doesn't have power in Gaza. The Ayatollah isn't sitting as a religious theocrat, dictator. Like, what more do you need? What more evidence? What more history do you need to objectively look at this and go, this crosses the line of morality I grew up with. This crosses all lines of evidence and is beyond a reasonable doubt for me to sit here as a citizen of a country that up until a few years ago really valued the letter of the law and thought language actually mattered. Where's the accountability? Someone called you a name? Okay, they called you a name. But unless it's one that is deliberately meant to be hateful and really sound the bell that says, oh, you're the racist I heard about, then you got to be accountable to a certain extent. And the threshold used to be pretty high. Well, it isn't anymore. And again, that is part of the problem, because we see these people who are offended at the misuse of a pronoun or dead naming, screaming in solidarity with people that would sooner kill them. The absurdity we see in real time every day. So, this is longer than a typical short that I would do. I've covered a lot of things I have in the past in shorter form. I don't see a lot of comments scrolling through, so if it's the few people watching at this time nodding in agreement, thank you. If you've already subscribed and liked, again, thank you. If you have something to say afterwards, because you're watching this after I've ended the stream, go ahead and comment. If you bring up history I won't like about Israel, okay. But I can tell you, as much as there are faults in its history, like any Western democracy, as we like to call it, well, I got to say, for an army who's literally committed the worst genocide in history, because they haven't, and to go out of its way to avoid civilian casualties like they have, well, I mean, from that moral standpoint alone, the evidence would suggest that Israel, right there, well, that's not a bad spot to start considering. How's the weather? Oh, there's no snow. Okay. How's the driving? Oh, it's as bad as Toronto in some places. Oh, well, that's not good. Insurance? What about that? Oh, there is none because they all drive like maniacs. Okay, kind of equals out. I've joked about that before too. I know, old material. So, before this does get too long and well beyond anybody's attention span, and at this rate, who really wants to hear me yak for hours at a time at this point? Well, it'd be news to me if you did. But if you have enjoyed this somewhat one-sided conversation at this rate, click subscribe and like. Comment anytime you feel comfortable. Share. And as hard as it may be, remaining silent isn't an option. I debated, should I do this? I said, no, despite how little views it could get, regardless of its reach and outcome, it's your obligation to learn from never again and speak up. So the energy's obviously there. There are days where it's a pretty empty well and it is hard. But on days like this, where it feels necessary to speak up, on the air of Israel's 76th birthday in its modern state, on the memorial of soldiers who died and fought for its independence, as they say in Israel, may their memory be a blessing. And for all of us who, Jewish or not, believe in Israel's right to exist, the Jewish people's right to exist and to live in peace, take these lessons from never again. It shouldn't have taken this long, but I guess as the saying goes, it's better late than never, right? Or hold on a minute, Canadian stereotype. I forgot to throw it in. Hey. Till the next time.